Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So today's program, I'm so glad you're joining us for. It is entitled Thanking Through Food, Thanksgiving Traditions in American Families. So my name is Laura Ettabbakh. I am a diplomat at the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai. And so I'm looking forward to sharing with you today a little bit about my own love for the Thanksgiving holiday, which we will be celebrating this Thursday in the United States and around the world for Americans that are located abroad. And so we'll also be talking about some culinary traditions that are so emblematic of the US celebration. And I'm really pleased to be joined on today's program by Mr. Ashwin Raghav Rengarajan, who previously studied at Northern Virginia Community College and had the opportunity to experience Thanksgiving in person during his time in the United States. So Ashwin, I know he's here on the program with me. Thank you so much for coming today. I look forward to hearing your story in this event. And yeah, so hopefully it'll be a great discussion, great time to spend some thought thinking about the holiday, what it means to everyone, and sharing our traditions with all of you who are watching. So for our viewers, I hope today's program will be fun, interesting, meaningful, and a really good way to have a great time this afternoon talking about American holidays, food culture, and a little bit of history. So it's about at this point, if we were all in the room together in person, I would probably ask everybody what the word Thanksgiving means to you. What sort of images come to your mind when you hear Thanksgiving? What your mind conjures up about this American holiday. So unfortunately, although we're absolutely thrilled to be sharing time with all of you virtually today, the platform doesn't allow us for as much interaction as maybe we'd have in other face-to-face encounters. However, we are going to have plenty of time for a question and answer period at the end of the program. So please, throughout the event today, post your questions in the comment box. Some of my colleagues will be monitoring that for your questions. You can post them at any time. And then Ashwin and I will be happy to do our best to answer them near the conclusion of today's event. So please feel free to also use the chat box to share anything you'd like to about today's event, any thoughts, comments, specifically about the Thanksgiving holiday. So we'd love to hear where you're watching from today. Hopefully you're all safe and dry. The weather is not so good today. But feel free to share, how you've experienced Thanksgiving in your lives. Maybe you've been in the States as tourists, as students, or maybe you're just an individual who's interested in American culture. Please feel free to share your experience. Just put a little note in there. We love to hear about what our viewers are interested in too. And of course, another aspect of Thanksgiving that has always been really meaningful for me personally is the opportunity to give thanks collectively and share those things that we're thankful for in our lives. So as we are living in these challenging times between lockdowns and COVID, I'd encourage all of you to post in the comments what you're thankful for. Maybe that way we can share a little bit of positivity, share the spirit of Thanksgiving during our program today. And during the time we have together this afternoon. Okay, so with that, I'd like to start us off by sharing a little bit. I'm going to put up a presentation in a few moments, sharing a little bit about the history of Thanksgiving, its origins, how it's celebrated in our current context, and of course, the star of the show, Thanksgiving food. So maybe we can even take a little poll here while I'm going through my slides. So as I've mentioned a couple times, food is really the main component of Thanksgiving in the United States, right? When we say Thanksgiving, everybody immediately thinks about what they're going to eat. So what do Americans eat on Thanksgiving? If you think you know what the typical traditional foods are for Americans to eat on Thanksgiving, go ahead and put it in the chat box. We'll see how many of you can guess the various types of foods that Americans eat at a typical Thanksgiving meal. And if you've had a Thanksgiving meal yourself, feel free to share what you loved, what your favorite part of the meal was, or anything else about that experience. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint. Just give me a moment while I share the screen here. All right. There we are. I hope you can all see that okay. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the traditions that we share during the Thanksgiving holiday, some of the history, and just a little bit more about the holiday. All right. So to go back, what is Thanksgiving and why did it start? Right? Maybe all of you know, maybe you don't. I personally had to do a little bit of research myself when I was looking into this question. Thanksgiving is so ingrained in American culture, but a lot of times we don't spend the time thinking about the historical roots and origins of why we do what we do. So, for a little bit of history lesson today, back in 1620, there were, excuse me, several boats of settlers and pilgrims, specifically religious refugees coming from Europe into North America to settle and found, new settlements along the coast. And one of the places they settled was in what we call today New England, right? So Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. If you're familiar with that area of the United States, it's kind of the northeast quadrant, which we call New England. So also, if you're not familiar, it's a little bit different than Chennai. It's extremely cold in the winter, very, very cold. And so the settlers that were coming to North America for the first time, they really were not prepared at all for what they were going to find. So they arrived in this particular settlement, right, that we're talking about today was the Plymouth colony in Plymouth, Massachusetts, what we call today Plymouth. And so when the settlers got to North America, they were totally unprepared for what they would find. They had brought some seeds with them from Europe when they came over, excuse me, but those seeds weren't native to North America and they didn't do very well. They also weren't prepared for the cold. They didn't have the right clothing, the right preparations. And so they really, really suffered the first winter that they were living in Plymouth colony. Many, many people died. It was a period of great difficulty, great, starvation. And so one of the ways that those settlers actually did survive was due to some help from the local Native American population that was living in the area. So prior to settlers coming to the United States, there were many, many nations of sovereign people living in North America, all the way across North America. The ones that were most closely associated with this particular location were the Wampanoag Nation. And so they assisted the settlers in getting local seeds, in teaching them how to hunt local game, in helping them make preparations so that their houses were warmer. Because remember, they had been living there for generations and generations. They knew exactly how to survive the winter. So it was really only with the assistance of the local Native Americans that the settlers were able to survive that first winter and get through to the next year. So in the year 1621, finally they felt like, okay, we have some food, we're not starving this year, things are looking a little bit up. So they had a harvest celebration in 1621 to celebrate, the bounty that they were able to eat, the game that they had killed for their table. And so that's sort of where Thanksgiving grew out of. They were giving thanks for the food, for the harvest, for the ability to maintain their settlement in this new world, right? So, many cultures around the world have harvest celebrations. Here in Chennai, right, we're going to be celebrating Pongal in a few months. In January, we have that big celebration coming up. In lots of southern India, that's an important celebration. Every country in the world has some sort of thanks for the food and the crops and the harvest that they get. So Thanksgiving is the version that we celebrate in America today. In Canada, they also have a Thanksgiving in Canada. It's on a different date. But for Americans, it's always the last Thursday in November. And that's when we continue the celebration of giving thanks for food and harvest. Okay, so modern interpretations. What does this look like today? So I've kind of mentioned this several times already, right? Celebration of thanks for harvest, friends, family, health, and blessings throughout the year. The reality is that most of us these days are not going out and harvesting our own crops. There are lots of great farming communities in the United States and North America, I personally am not one of them. I don't go out and harvest my own corn, but it's continuing with the celebration of giving thanks for what we have in our lives. So today, many people will use Thanksgiving as a chance to share the blessings that they've experienced throughout the year, right? Whether it's something small, whether it's something large, a new job, somebody's recovered health, the birth of a child. It's a time to really reflect on those celebrations. And you'll see here on my screen, hopefully, I have an image kind of up there, which is some of the typical imagery we see related to Thanksgiving. And I just want to pause for one moment and say something that's, I think, very important to acknowledge. So when we talk about Thanksgiving in the modern context, we frequently say that it's a celebration of the Pilgrims and Indians and how they got along during this first winter in the New World, right? And I should just mention here, if you're not familiar with why we say Indians, right? Indians meaning Native Americans, the native tribes and peoples and nations that were in North America prior to European settlement. It's because originally when Christopher Columbus came over to North America, he was very confused. He thought that he had gotten to India, right? He didn't know that he was in somewhere completely different. So he called the native people there Indians, right? We have very many actual Indians with us joining us today. But when we talk about Pilgrims and Indians in the Thanksgiving context, most people are referring to the Native American tribes and nations that were living in North America. And I just also want to note, the Wampanoag Nation, we tend to talk about them today as this sort of generous, giving people that shared their food and made these loving bonds with the Pilgrims and the settlers. And the reality is that many Native cultures across North America suffered greatly due to settlement from European colonizers. And so I do just want to take a moment to recognize that that is an element of Thanksgiving today that many people are looking at and discussing, that how is the way that we talk about Thanksgiving actually hurtful to the reality that Native populations lived in North America, right? So many of them, the Wampanoag, for example, were decimated by diseases, by other viruses that the settlers brought with them, and they truly suffered, and Native people continue to suffer in many ways today. So I do just want to make a note of that it's important to recognize sort of the lived reality of the Native Americans that were here before European settlement. Okay. So food culture. Now we finally come to what you're all here for, right? Food. I know that's what I'm always here for at Thanksgiving, is food. So I hope some of you, I can't see the chat right now, but I hope some of you have guessed what typical American Thanksgiving food looks like. I hope maybe you got some of them right. This is what I would consider to be sort of typical food culture for a Thanksgiving meal, right? And pretty much always the star of the show is turkey, right? You see that the images of that huge bird on the table. Everyone's enjoying the turkey. I think in America, people eat turkey, but not like as a whole bird, right? It's really, really emblematic of the Thanksgiving holiday. And so you can see on the image here, we've got some turkey on this plate. Another thing that people very frequently eat is called stuffing, right? Stuffing can be different depending on who you asked. Originally, it means like the stuff, it literally means the things that you stuff the turkey with, right? You put inside the turkey to stuff it. So a lot of people make it out of like a cornbread or just kind of any sort of bread. It's like a bread that you've baked with herbs, maybe some veggies, some onions and garlic. It's my favorite part of the Thanksgiving meal. I love stuffing. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to taste that. Other things being mashed potatoes, right? A puree of potatoes, gravy, some sort of meat gravy that people typically put over top of their food, cranberry sauce. And I will pause here to say that cranberry sauce is very divisive in the United States. People have very strong opinions about cranberry sauce. Personally, my family does not eat cranberry sauce, and nobody would touch it if it were on the table. But other people swear that they have to have it as part of their Thanksgiving dinner, right? Some people swear it has to be from a can. You can get canned cranberry sauce. Some people say it has to be homemade. Some people like it thicker. So there's always a healthy debate about how cranberry sauce should or should not be served as part of a Thanksgiving meal. Okay, and then we go on to the vegetables. You can really have any sort of vegetable at a Thanksgiving dinner. I think some of the more typical ones would be corn, squash, green beans. Those are ones that you typically see. Some people will make green bean casserole. It looks like in the image I have here, we've got some green beans. Oh, and you can see the cranberry sauce in the background. And then any other things that people like to add to their meals. Some people will have dinner rolls or bread. And then almost always there is pie for dessert, right? So you can have different types of pies, apple pie, pumpkin pie, whatever pie. Most people will also have a pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie is very, very typical for a Thanksgiving meal. So why do we have these particular foods? Some of it stems from this history that we were just talking about with the Native American populations that helped the first settlers learn to eat and cook. A lot of the foods that we celebrate have roots in Native American food culture. For example, corn is a really prominent one, squash and beans. Those are all sort of staples of some Native American diets that people now bring into the tradition of their Thanksgiving meal. Likewise with turkey, that was a bird that the settlers could hunt and have on their table as part of their meat in the first meals that they had. So there is that connection sort of back to the historical roots of the holiday. And for me, Thanksgiving food is like my favorite food ever. My parents make it for me for my birthday every year. Even though my birthday is in the summer, it's not Thanksgiving. But there's something about this meal that's just really comforting and really sort of brings home a lot of nostalgia for me and for many Americans. Okay, so in my family, and I think you'll find in many American families, there are a lot of traditions that people make that are very family specific, right? So there's sort of these universal traditions where people get together with a family or friends, they share a meal, but then each family also makes it their own, right? So you'll find that when you ask someone, well, what do you do for Thanksgiving? Almost every person will have some sort of thing that they have to do on Thanksgiving. For some families, they like to watch American football. There's always like an American football game. And my family doesn't watch football, so I couldn't really give you any details about that. But for some people, that's a very important part of Thanksgiving, is the football game. For some people, they always do an activity. They always go for a hike after the meal or go for a walk. So for my family, we don't have any specific traditions like that per se, but we do have sort of specific food traditions. And one of them, this is blasphemy, is we don't eat a turkey. Uh-oh, I know I just said that was like the star of the show for Thanksgiving food, but we always eat a chicken. Why that is, I don't particularly know. Turkeys are very, very large birds. They make a lot of food. My family growing up was always fairly small. I have, one brother and my parents. So it was the four of us. And then my grandparents would join us, while they were still living. So it wasn't a huge, huge group of people, right? For some people, Thanksgiving dinner is like 25 people. And you have that huge turkey, maybe more than one turkey. Maybe you need 2 turkeys for your Thanksgiving celebration. For my family, we had a chicken. It's a little easier to find. It's a little smaller. We like the flavor. No big deal. We still have a bird on the table. For us, we also for dessert always eat pumpkin pie and pecan pie. Always have the 2 options. We don't have apple pie. I think that we don't eat green beans as part of our Thanksgiving meal. We always have a squash option and frequently asparagus, I think is kind of what my family does. But Thanksgiving is really important for me and for my family for another reason, which is one, it's not a super commercial celebration, right? So in the United States, a lot of our celebrations have become very commercialized. If you think about something like Christmas or Easter, Valentine's Day. Those are big holidays that lots of families celebrate, but they're a lot about presents and giving and cards and money spent. Whereas Thanksgiving is really not as much about those commercial aspects. It's really more about family and tradition and food. So there's that aspect. That's part of why I really love it. And the other part is for me and for my family, it represents the start of the winter holiday season. So again, there's a lot of debate in the United States about when to put up a Christmas tree. Many families celebrate the winter holidays with a Christmas tree if they are of that faith. Others don't celebrate Christmas at all. Others celebrate Hanukkah. Others celebrate Kwanzaa. There's lots of holiday celebrations. But for me and for my family, Thanksgiving represents the start of those celebrations. So we always have our Thanksgiving meal together on Thursday. And Friday, we spend the whole day getting the house ready for the holidays, decorating, putting up the Christmas tree, making Christmas cookies, watching our favorite Christmas movies. So it's kind of the start of a whole month-long celebration for us. It really kicks it off. So it's very fun in that regard too. You'll find that some people don't celebrate it in that way. It's different for them. But for my family, that's what we do. Okay, how are we doing on time here? All right, just a reminder as we're going through this, make sure to put your questions in the chat box. And now, just in case you all have not had Thanksgiving here in India and you'd like to give it a try this year, I've put up a pumpkin pie recipe. This is the recipe that my family always uses for pumpkin pie. It's adapted from the Silver Palette cookbook. It's slightly different than their version, but that's where it came from originally. So my colleagues are going to be posting this, I believe, hopefully in the chat box, but then also at the end of today's presentation, they will put up an image with this on. So feel free to screenshot it, excuse me, or save it, do what you need to do so that you can try it at home if you'd like, okay? So here are all the ingredients on one side and the preparation on the other. This is an American recipe, so maybe the measurements we use are a little bit different than what you're used to here in India. We use Fahrenheit, but it's very easy to convert everything in this recipe if you're unsure about the measurement quantities, excuse me. Another thing is, one of the great things about traveling and living somewhere else is that you get to experience different food cultures, but it can also be challenging if you need ingredients that you're used to in your house. So maybe you don't have all of these things in your personal pantry at your home. Hopefully you can find them, but if you can't, there's always ways to substitute things, I think. So for example, this recipe calls for cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and cardamom. India is like the spice capital of the world. There are so many spices here, it blows my mind. But if you don't have all the spices, that's okay. Just use something that works for you. Use a blend. You need cinnamon, but for example, I don't always have cardamom in my house. So sometimes I don't put cardamom in, and that's okay. If you don't have canned pumpkin, you can use fresh pumpkin. You just need to kind of boil it down and make a puree out of it yourself. There are lots of recipes online for how to do that. Okay, so I hope that you all will make a pumpkin pie and share the pictures of it on social media. See if you can have a little bit of your American Thanksgiving celebration at home this week. And I'll just walk you real fast through the steps. I made this over the weekend and it turned out pretty well. So here we go. So the first step obviously is gather all of your ingredients together. You can see I've got all my ingredients here on one side. For a pie, if you've never made a pie before of this style, you do need a pie crust, right? Which is kind of the base, the pastry base of a pie. I am super lazy, so I use frozen pie crusts, which I'm not sure about availability. They are available here, but you may need to kind of hunt around for them. So you can see in my picture, I have a frozen pie crust. You can also make your own pie crust very, very easily. It's essentially just flour, water, and butter, maybe a little bit of salt. Again, just Google a quick recipe for pie crust. You can make that very easily at home. So it starts out by blending the sugars. We've got white sugar and brown sugar and 3 eggs, blending them together until they are light and fluffy, until those eggs have really started to whip up in shape. Okay, and you can see here on the left, I've added in the pumpkin puree, all of my spices, the cinnamon, allspice, the cardamom, and you just mix it together. That's really it. It's so easy. Once you get the ingredients, this is like the easiest pie to make ever. Mix it all together. And then the third picture here, you've got the pie with the cream, right? So after you've mixed that, you add the cream, mix it once again. It looks like this kind of soupy, it's very liquidy, very soupy. Okay, and then, ooh, got some thunder. I don't know if y'all can hear that here. Then you just pour it in your pie crust, whatever pie crust you have. Now, my pie crusts that I had bought, my Lazy People frozen pie crusts, were very shallow. So I actually had enough filling to make 2 pumpkin pies. So I just poured it into both of those pie shells. If you use a deeper dish, you may only get 1 pumpkin pie out of this. Pop it in the oven. I don't have the recipe right in front of me at the moment, so I think you bake it for a few minutes at a very high temperature, then lower the temperature and leave it in there for another about 40 minutes to bake. Okay, and of course, you can't have pumpkin pie without whipped cream. You can, in the United States, many people will use like prepackaged whipped cream. You can also make your own very easily. I didn't have any prepackaged whipped cream here, so I made my own. I just took some heavy whipping cream with a little bit of icing sugar and a little bit of vanilla, blended that up until it was nice and stiff. You really want to get sort of like a stiff texture to your whipped cream. And voila, there we go. You have a pumpkin pie. You can have your very own Thanksgiving pie dinner celebration. I have some right here with me today. This is all that's remaining of pie number 1. I have eaten the rest of it entirely by myself because my husband doesn't like pumpkin pie. So while Ashwin is giving his presentation, I'm going to be celebrating my own little Thanksgiving here by eating this last piece of pumpkin pie. Again, we'll post that recipe in the comments and at the end of our presentation. I hope that was fun, just something light. You can give it a try and have your own Thanksgiving celebration at home. Okay, so that's it for my part of the presentation for right now. Again, if you have questions about anything I talked about, anything you heard that's confusing or interesting or you'd like to share, please post it in the comments. We'll have time for question and answer in just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing here. We'll go back. Okay. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker to share his experience and thoughts on the Thanksgiving holiday. So Mr. Ashwin Raghav Rengarajan is an alumnus of the Community College Initiative program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. Ashwin earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Guru Nanak College and a technical certificate in entrepreneurship from Northern Virginia Community College. Currently, he is co-founder of TWYF, a digital marketing agency, and the vice president of a nonprofit organization, International Youth Organization for Peace and Sustainability. Ashwin is also a national level cricketer, speller, and he has won 46 different cultural and business competitions during his college days. So as you can see, Ashwin must be very, very busy. Ashwin, thank you so much for taking time out of your packed schedule to join us today on this program and to talk about Thanksgiving. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to talk about your Thanksgiving experience.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's such a pleasure for me to be here today. And it was really wonderful to hear your pumpkin pie story and your experience with your family. So that I think it gave it a personal touch. And before going into anything else, I was just thinking about this one question that you asked. My favorite food, Thanksgiving food that I had in the US, is definitely going to be mashed potatoes and gravy. And I know this is kind of an odd choice because this is a side dish more than a main dish, but I just finished it off. Yeah. So let me share my screen so that you can see some pictures from my experience from last year, and I'll also share a little bit about my exchange program in the United States. Yes, here we go. So I am Ashwin Raghav Rengarajan, and I was in the United States, Northern Virginia, pretty much close to Washington, D.C., the capital of the country. So I was a part of the CCI program, which also means Community College Initiative program, which is sponsored by the US Department of State, as Laura said. I was part of the 2019 to 20 cohort. So let me explain a bit about what I did in the United States. I studied entrepreneurship and nutrition, and I interned at a place where they sell vegan date spreads. And I know this event is always going to be about food, and it just mixes and matches with my experience perfectly as well. So I also volunteered for the World Bank TEDx events, and I am a firm believer of climate change. So I was given the opportunity of attending climate rallies and policy hearings. So this is, I think, my most favorite part of the United States. You have this freedom of speech and expression, and it doesn't matter if you are a citizen or not. You still have those rights. So that was like the best thing that I experienced in the US, amongst other things. And I also celebrated festivals like Easter, Christmas, Ramadan, Diwali, and Thanksgiving as well. So it was like a mix of the best food from all cultures and all religions. So you might be jealous because I know food is always really good, and food from different places are going to be, I just cannot explain because you know how the experience is. So, talking a little bit about my program, the CCI program, there are six main pillars to it. The first one is academics. So that's why I studied entrepreneurship and also nutrition at Northern Virginia Community College. The next part is service learning or volunteering. So this is where we lend our hand to the community, where we get this skill of helping those in need and taking the time out of your busy schedules whenever you can and give back to the community, which is one thing I definitely learned a lot in the US because I was volunteering in India, but it was not that much. It was not significant and it was not diverse, to be precise, because I just had this one area of interest and I was always volunteering for environment-based stuff. But when I went to the US, I found so many different opportunities, and it just made me learn so many new skills in all those different areas. And you have seen my screen just brightened up because the power just came back. So the weather is not being kind today. Oh, there's another thunder. So the third pillar of the program are internships. We were not allowed to have paid internships, so it was also kind of like service learning, but in a corporate sense. So I was really fortunate to find this brilliant and aspiring woman from Albania who was an immigrant herself. So she was an entrepreneur, and I was really glad to work under her. I learned a lot of stuff, and it also taught me so much about the corporate culture and the startup culture, of course, because I was studying entrepreneurship, and this was just perfect for me. And the next pillar is cultural exchange, probably the most important part of the program because this program is called as a cultural exchange program. It is not an academic exchange program or a student exchange program, but it is a cultural exchange program. So we had people from 12 different countries belonging to so many different faiths and beliefs. And it was really an exchange of ideas and thoughts. The next pillar is leadership. you always had leadership opportunities within the program and outside the program. It was always up to us to take the opportunities and make the best out of it. The final part of the program is action planning. This is where we plan something that we can execute when we come back to our home. That is, for me, India. And we do this the whole year. We plan something, with actionable steps that we can take when we come back home and execute it. So this is basically the most important parts of the program. So let's now get into Thanksgiving. So I was fortunate enough to not celebrate one or two, but three Thanksgiving dinners with three different families that I had in the US. And the first family, the most important family, is my CCI program cohort. As you can see, there must be around 30 odd people there with our program coordinators and other staffs from the CCI program. And it's really unfortunate to see that the table is empty because this picture was taken right at the end of the program, right at the end of the celebration. But anyways, on the left side, you can see a picture of a sweet potato casserole with marshmallows. So we had five different houses within the program, and each different house was given a task of making a unique Thanksgiving dish. And I mean, it might have not come out perfectly well, but we still were able to eat it, and it was really fun to engage with other roommates of mine and make the beautiful dishes and eat them together. So the second Thanksgiving dinner that I had was with a community group called the International Friends. And this is one unique aspect of the United States. You have a lot of community groups that gather every weekend or every day in a week to have food, to have conversations, and to just have fun time around, you know, just coming back from work or coming off a really tiring week. It's just really good to engage with the community, to have fun with them. And I was also given this leadership opportunity of being an MC, Master of Ceremonies, just like hosting the whole event that night. And it was something that I've done before, but it was not completely in English. So this was like a unique experience that I had. And apart from the food and everything, we had fun games on that night, and we had to make some turkeys out of balloons and papers and some stationery material. We had a lot of kids, so it was really funny, and we had a lot of senior citizens as well. So it was like a mix of both worlds, and we just had super fun that day. I hope this GIF comes perfectly well to you. Anyways, you can see another 30 odd group of people. So it was like always a huge gathering of people. Um, Fortunately for me, in my experience, so we never felt left alone or we never felt homesick for a long period of time because all these wonderful people were there for us all the time. And of course, we hear a lot of issues like racism, discrimination. But for me, in the 12 months that I stayed in the United States, I did not face even one such issue. So I think partly it was also because of the community that I had. And I'm always grateful for them, for having them in my life. So the third Thanksgiving experience that I had, which fell on the Thanksgiving week as well, this was a short road trip to Lancaster, a small village in Pennsylvania. And there's a really special thing about this village because most of the people who resided in this village were belonging to the Amish community or Mennonites. So what's special about these Amish people is that they are very traditional in the way they do things. And for example, I can give you a couple of examples. Like they don't use vehicles with engines, so they still use horse cars, and they don't use electricity. They just have battery powered lamps, stuff like that. So it's like, wow. it was really unique for me to experience that in the United States, particularly because we've always known that the US is such an advanced country. We've seen all the developments, and to go to that village, to be with that people, to experience that lifestyle they had was completely different. We stayed there for 4 or 5 days. A host family of about 8 or 9 people, if I'm not wrong. The father, the mother, 4 brothers, and a couple of sisters. So it was like a huge family home, and they were really traditional in the way they did things too. So most of these people were farmers or skilled workers who made really beautiful houses in and around Pennsylvania. We also had short presentation about the history of the Amish people and how they celebrated Thanksgiving, which was different than how the rest of the US celebrated. I think that resonates with what Laura said because each family has a different way of celebrating Thanksgiving, like how she has chicken, how the others have turkey, and some people they don't have anything. They just have other Thanksgiving foods as well. The most important part. I am so glad to have captured this picture because I was going through my gallery from last year and I was so dejected of not finding a really good picture. But this was like the only one picture, and you can see the gravy right next to me, and that bowl was empty by the end of the dinner. And that particular family that hosted me, that beautiful family, they had all their family, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, children, sisters, and brothers, and there was more than 30 people in just one house. And for 4 to 5 days, it was like a complete feeling of nostalgia because I used to have the same experience when I was younger in India when we used to celebrate such holidays with our family. But as we move to different cities right now, it's still possible, but we don't do it as much as we did before. So it was really that sense of nostalgia that I had, and it was a day full of conversations, and they were talking about how they used to celebrate Thanksgiving um, on their grandfathers or their great grandfathers' time and how it evolved over time. So it was really wonderful to hear all that. I was so grateful to have experienced this unique thing, and having had 3 Thanksgiving dinners was really more than what I can ask for. And I think before I visit the United States again, those 3 dinners will suffice for the time being. And wonderful food, wonderful day, wonderful people. And we ended the day with saying thanks to the people that we had and still have in our life, and for the friends, for the family, for our loved ones, and for the moments that we had together, and for the successes in our professional life, in our personal life, everything, everything. It was a day full of reflection, a day full of thoughts and ideas in how to improve ourselves in the way we thanked each other, because I think we don't thank each other as much as we have to, as much as we need to, because we fail to celebrate even the little things that make us happy, because all these little things make up the bigger thing that we aim for in life, the things that we have in life. So I just request all of us attending this meeting today to thank each other for every single deed that we do to each other in our life. So I think that will conclude my session. And thank you so much for patiently listening to me. And I'm so grateful that the power was restored and that you can see my face better than before, because it was so dim. The lights were dim before. So I'm glad. I'm glad to be here, and I'm thankful that the U.S. Embassy, U.S. Consulate General was thinking of inviting me for this event today. And thank you, Laura. Thank you to everyone who but behind scenes. And I think it's time for question and answers. I was seeing a couple of interesting questions already when Laura was speaking. So let's see what Laura has right now. So let me end sharing my screen right now. Perfect. I'll hand it over to you, Laura.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ashwin, for sharing that. That was really great. Before we go into the Q&A, you're right, we've already gotten a lot of really great questions. Please keep them coming. We may not have time for everything, but we're going to do our best to get to them. But just a few things I wanted to mention, Ashwin. I loved that you talked about having multiple meals for Thanksgiving. That's really great. And it's something that we see a lot, I think, in the modern context of Thanksgiving. For example, you know, and you mentioned being apart from family. I've spent a lot of time talking about Thanksgiving as being like a family celebration, but the reality is that we don't always live near our families these days, right? We're not living necessarily in the same city. For me, I don't live in the same country as my parents at the moment, obviously. So, you know, there are ways that people are also adapting the holiday to the modern context. So for many, many years, I lived in a different city from my family, and I always had what we called Friendsgiving, right? Instead of Thanksgiving, Friendsgiving, because it was a whole lot of us that weren't able to travel to be with our families. So we'd get together as a group of friends and have the meal, celebrate, much like what you did in some of your celebrations, and you know, have that in the context of sharing the meal with friends. And the other thing I loved is that you talked about Lancaster. I am from Lancaster. That is my hometown. I grew up there. So I'm so glad you were able to experience my home culture. I'm not Amish, but I'm very familiar with that group of people and the Mennonite culture there. So I'm so happy that you were able to go to Lancaster. That like made my day. So wonderful. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the great questions we've had coming in here. Okay, so the first one we had is, do we have a vegetarian version of Thanksgiving to keep up with the times? That is a really, really great question. The answer is absolutely. Again, people make Thanksgiving what they want it to be, what they need it to be for their families. So, you know, so many people choose not to have meat as part of their diet, or they choose to only have specific types of meat. Maybe they only eat fish. I think while we were talking, I just did like a quick Google search for meatless Thanksgiving, and there are millions of posts about options to have for Thanksgiving that don't involve meat. You know, a lot of people will make like a mushroom dish. We have the very big portobello mushrooms in the United States. I've never seen them here, but maybe I'll have them. Please enlighten me. That you can grill. They're almost like a burger of some sort. They're very meaty and heavy, but it's a mushroom. So some people will have that. Another thing that a lot of people will have, we call tofurkey, which is a tofu-based turkey. So it's a soy product-based turkey. It's vegetarian. You know, you can have it vegan depending on your dietary preferences. And it's just a way to kind of have some protein and some substance. But some people just skip the meat altogether and just have the sides, right? The potatoes and the stuffing and the bread. And there's so much food that you don't even need to have one thing or the other to make it a meal. And that's what's great about people really adapting it to their own dietary needs. Ashwin, did you have any sort of like tofurkey or vegetarian Thanksgivings during your time in the United States? Did you get to experience that?
Not really during Thanksgiving, but I turned vegetarian by January, so I can really understand the questions that we have, and I've of course had tofurkey with tofu and other options with mushroom, and there are stuff like tofu, like sitian and other stuff that I can't really pronounce well, but they all taste almost similar to meat. If you really don't like or if you don't really consume meat, there are always a ton of opportunities because I also found this that in the United States, you have a lot of vegan options than you can find in India. And it's also cheaper relatively when you compare it with the prices here in India.
Perfect. So somebody asked if we could share some of those vegetarian recipes. Unfortunately, I don't have any specifically here, but I would just suggest searching for key terms like vegetarian Thanksgiving, meatless Thanksgiving. There are so many recipes out there. The internet is an amazing thing for recipes these days. I'm always constantly Googling things. If you can find tofu, you can find great recipes to make tofu. So do give that a try as well. All right, and then I see we had a question up here from Ms. Gayatri, Department of Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics. It looks like, please throw some light on the differences between yesteryear's family kitchen and today's. So that's a really, really great question. I think, we have sort of these traditions that continue, but we've also seen, as I mentioned, the modernization of our food culture, of the way we cook, of the way our kitchens are set up. And so, at least, I think we can look at this from two sides, right? We can look at it from the actual food, which is, one aspect of it, but also socially and culturally, how our kitchens and our food culture have changed. So I think today, at least if we're going to talk about Thanksgiving, you do see a lot more sort of pre-packaged options. And that's, emblematic of a lot of our food culture today, as we have this busy sort of hectic life. Preparing a large Thanksgiving meal is so time consuming. Some people spend days preparing every element of it and, getting it all ready to cook. You spend all day in the kitchen. It's a huge experience. So for me, for my stuffing, for example, I use a cornbread mix from a bag. I do add my own onions and garlic, but I don't spend the time like pre-baking the bread and chopping it up, which is a lot of time. So as you sort of switch into this more commercialized, prepackaged food culture, that does bring up questions about dietary concerns, sodium intake. We could spend a whole other discussion talking about, the packaging and the commercialization of food culture, I think. So there are those elements. But then I think also socially, we see the way that our kitchens are set up in America and around the world changing, right? If you look back at ads for Thanksgiving from the 1950s, it's always women in aprons cooking a Thanksgiving meal in the kitchen while their husband, is out eating, that the men are watching football while the women are cleaning and cooking. And I think that we've also seen a change in the way that we assume about people's family roles in the kitchen and cooking, and hopefully a shift towards more shared culture of food and preparation of food. In my family, certainly we share the duties of cooking Thanksgiving meals. So I'm the pie specialist in my family. You wouldn't know it necessarily from that pie recipe I threw at you, but I do love to bake pies. My dad takes care of the meats. My mom takes care of the veggies. My brother takes care of the beverages. So, sort of a more sharing of the food culture, I think, too. Ashwin, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I was thinking about the vegetarian option. So I was thinking about all the different Thanksgiving foods that you displayed on the screen, and I found out that only turkey was the meat, and maybe in one of those pies you might add some meat, but rest of them were vegetarian, I guess, if I'm not wrong.
Very
And
true. And I think, go ahead.
yeah, when they were asking this question about comparing yesteryear's way of cooking and cooking that we do in the modern times, and it's really interesting because I had this nutrition course, and it just shed light on so many issues that it's so obvious to us, but we don't really realize it in our day-to-day lives. But we really need someone to explain it in detail for us to understand it better. And it's just out there for us. If we search for it, we can get answers, and there are so many alternatives that we can adopt in our day-to-day life, and it completely depends on whether we are willing to make that change or not.
Excellent points. And I think, I would just add to that I think we have a greater realization also today of the ways in which our food culture and our food consumption impacts issues such as environmental issues, economic issues. It's all tied together. So we also see people opting for more organic options in their food choices, looking for ways to decrease their environmental impact in the food that they consume. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk. Maybe we'll do another food program at some point to talk about these issues. This is a fascinating subject. And we've had a couple questions about that, a couple of questions about sort of the connection between food and land and farming. Those are all really important issues. Anytime we have a harvest festival, a celebration of crops, I think it brings into new perspective the importance of the agricultural economy to every aspect of our life, really. So I'm gonna put a pause on that there because we're running out of time, unfortunately, to jump to another question, which is we've had a couple questions about the presidential pardoning of the turkey. So I must admit, I don't watch the pardoning of the turkey. I'm actually not really familiar with this tradition, but you all are better informed than I am. What I can tell you is that yes, there is a tradition. There's like a televised speech where typically the president takes a turkey and pardons it from its Thanksgiving death. And it's kind of like one of those traditions that grows out of something actual and then becomes a tradition for the tradition itself, I think. So, historically, turkeys were donated to the President of the United States each Thanksgiving as a gift. And so over time, there became a tradition of some of the presidents, pardoning the turkey and sending it actually to a zoo rather than consuming it as part of their Thanksgiving meal. So now we have this televised event where they do it. It's frequently tied into political satire. I think, back in the 80s, there were some comments about political pressure for pardoning of some political issues and individuals. And so they had this pardoning of the turkey as a satire on presidential pardoning. So there's a lot of kind of elements that go into that. But now it's just a fun way to kind of celebrate the holiday. I think also, again, we talked about, meatless options, people hoping to see different viable options rather than killing animals as part of their meals. So it's connected to a lot of different aspects of the Thanksgiving holiday. Did you watch that at all when you were in the United States, Ashwin? Is it something you saw?
No, I had no idea before seeing the question today, and I was Googling a little bit, and I found out that it was Harry S. Truman. In 1947, he was the first president to pardon the turkey, and it was also, I also read that there was some lobbying by groups for meatless Mondays and poultry-less Thursdays to go a little meat-free and to give more emphasis on cereals and raisins, all the millets, like, I don't know, just to encourage people to consume them more. That's what I read today. So that was interesting back in 1947 to go meat-free. I was surprised.
Great, perfect. Okay, and so we are just about out of time. I'm going to try to look here. We've got a few questions I'm going to answer very quickly. Somebody asked, can we donate during Thanksgiving? I'm not sure specifically what that question is regarding in terms of who to donate or what to donate, but I will just say really fast that for a lot of people, part of the Thanksgiving celebration is, and it's part of giving thanks, is donating time and food to other people that don't have necessarily the means to celebrate Thanksgiving in this big elaborate way, right? We have lots of individuals in America, around the world, that are food poor. They're suffering from a lack of healthy, sustainable food options in their communities. So many people will take part of their Thanksgiving to donate to food banks, where the organization is giving food away for free. They're always accepting Thanksgiving meal donations so that everybody, no matter what their economic status, can participate in Thanksgiving in a meaningful and fulfilling way. So if that's something that's important to you, please do consider that. If you're celebrating your own Thanksgiving or your own harvest or your own thanks, donations are always appreciated to folks for that. And then finally, someone asked, am I going, I think this is for me, did I celebrate Pongal? Yes and no. So this year, sadly, I think with COVID, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to celebrate in the same way. But last year, I was really, really grateful to be able to celebrate Pongal with my colleagues. We had some great celebrations at the Consulate, learned a lot about the food culture here in South India from my colleagues. We had an amazing meal that we shared together. So in many ways, having that experience, maybe in the same way that you had, Ashwin, during your time in the United States, filled a big void in terms of, not being close to my family, but being able to celebrate food and time together in a meaningful way here. Okay. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we are out of time. It's 4 o'clock, y'all. We have so many great questions. Hopefully we can do another food program in the future. I hope if we do that you all will join us and continue these really great conversations about food, about celebrations. But right now, unfortunately, we are out of time. So Ashwin, before we close, are there anything else you'd like to say before we finish today? Any final parting words?
Well, thank you everyone for joining today, and be safe because we're expecting a cyclone to hit us tomorrow. So let's just try to be safe amongst all the virus issues that we have already. And I'll also suggest you to look more into the Thanksgiving event festival in the US and also other events like Easter, Christmas. Probably you'll find more information on that on the US Consulate General's Facebook page in the coming future. It's it's really great to learn about different cultures and traditions. It just improves us, improves our knowledge, and it really evolves our way of thinking. And that's my personal experience, and I hope it'll be the same for you. And thanks once again for having me here.
Great. Thanks so much, Ashwin. It was really a pleasure hearing about your Thanksgiving story and for sharing your insights on diet and food culture, and everything else. So thank you for your time. It was really a pleasure to spend this afternoon with you. And so with that, just a few concluding words as we wrap up today. I hope you all have enjoyed today's programming in this virtual space. If you have, please stay tuned for more virtual cultural programming from the US Consulate General Chennai and from our American Center. Unfortunately, the actual American Center is currently closed to the public, but when we resume services, patrons can visit the state-of-the-art facilities. There are more than 15,000 resources and journals, movies, a children's corner. It's a really amazing space. So hopefully you all will be able to visit that location. And in the meantime, please do continue to follow the Consulate on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about additional programs like the one we had today. When I wrap up my remarks, my colleagues will put up our social media information on the screen so you can grab that, screenshot it, and continue to follow us, okay? And again, as Ashwin mentioned, please stay dry, please stay safe in these coming days. Please continue to monitor the weather reports and take good precautionary measures. Stay inside as the cyclone approaches, okay? And of course, as we're giving thanks, I'd like to thank not only Ashwin for his time, but the American Center at the US Consulate General Chennai, and all of my colleagues who have worked so hard on this program behind the scenes. You all are wonderful and very talented and made this and many other programs possible. So thank you for your technical and content expertise and for making today's program really successful. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. I hope you all have some tasty food in your future, maybe some pumpkin pie. Look for that recipe at the end of the presentation or in the chats. Thank you again so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week, everyone. All right, happy Thanksgiving.